So my boyfriend Malcolm just told me I'm dead to him because I wouldn't give him my entire freaking paycheck so he could buy some fancy Dodge Challenger he's been obsessing over for months. And when I say my entire paycheck, I mean literally every single dollar I earn as a pharmacy technician, which isn't exactly rolling in money territory, but it's my money that I work 40 hours a week for, dealing with insurance companies and cranky customers who blame me personally when their medications cost too much. But that's not even the worst part. This absolute clown went online and made some viral post calling me a broke gold digger, which makes zero sense because he's the one demanding my money. And now half the internet thinks I'm some terrible girlfriend who won't support her man's dreams. The post got shared like crazy on Facebook and Instagram, and people I work with have seen it. My coworker Emily showed it to me during our lunch break at the CVS, and I wanted to crawl under the pharmacy counter and disappear forever. When I tried to defend myself in the comments, explaining that I have rent and bills and, need to eat food occasionally, Malcolm completely lost it. He called me while I was restocking medications and told me I better delete my comments and stop making him look bad, or he would leak screenshots of our private text conversations. And I'm talking about private stuff. Intimate messages, pictures, conversations about my family drama with my parents' divorce. Everything personal I've ever shared with him. He said I better do what he says, or everyone would see exactly what kind of person I really am. The pure rage I felt hearing those words while I'm standing there in my work uniform, trying to keep my voice down so customers wouldn't hear me having a breakdown next to the blood pressure monitors. Who does that? Who threatens someone they claim to love with humiliation and revenge, basically? I had to excuse myself to the employee bathroom and just stood there shaking with anger. And his mom, his freaking mother, had the nerve to message me on Facebook saying I brought this whole mess on myself for not being supportive enough of her precious son's goals. She wrote this long paragraph about how a real woman would sacrifice for her man and how disappointed she is in my attitude. Like, lady, your 32-year-old son is throwing tantrums because his girlfriend won't bankrupt herself for his midlife crisis car. Barbara really had the audacity to tell me that when she was my age, women knew how to put their men first. Ma'am, this is 2025, not 1955. Malcolm has been posting updates about how he put me in my place and how women these days don't understand loyalty. His friends are all commenting with fire emojis and calling me names I won't repeat here. Meanwhile, I'm getting messages from random strangers telling me I'm selfish and don't deserve him. One girl literally wrote that I should be grateful any man wants to include me in his dreams. The comments are making me sick, but I can't stop reading them. Here's what really gets me, though. This car costs $48,000. $48,000. He expects me to hand over my November paycheck, my December paycheck, probably my January and February ones too, so he can drive around feeling like some kind of action hero. When I pointed out that I have student loans, car insurance, groceries, and, oh yeah, my half of the rent for the apartment we share, he actually said those were my problems to figure out. The guy who sleeps in my bed every night and eats the groceries I buy told me my basic living expenses were my problems to figure out, while demanding I fund his toy. I make $32,000 a year before taxes. He wants me to give him more than I make in over a year so he can have a faster car than his friend Graham. I've been with Malcolm for 2 years and 3 months to be exact. We moved in together last spring when his lease was up and mine was ending anyway. Things weren't perfect, but they were decent enough. He makes around $55,000, which is more than me, but apparently not enough for the specific car he wants right now immediately without any planning or saving. The whole obsession started in September when his friend Graham got some bright red Camaro, and suddenly Malcolm decided his car was embarrassing and beneath him. He started spending literally hours every night online looking at car listings and showing me pictures of these expensive machines like I was supposed to get excited about going into debt for them. He'd interrupt my favorite shows to show me yet another listing and get annoyed when I didn't share his enthusiasm. When I suggested maybe saving up first or looking at certified pre-owned options that wouldn't require my entire financial contribution, he got annoyed and said I didn't understand his vision. His vision apparently requires my entire paycheck while he keeps his money for whatever he wants. He told me real couples make sacrifices for each other's happiness, but somehow all the sacrificing was supposed to come from me. Last week, he started getting more aggressive about it. He'd bring up the car every single day, during dinner, while we're watching TV, when I'm getting ready for work in the morning, constantly talking about how this car would change his life and make him feel confident and successful. He said he deserved to have nice things after working so hard and that I should want to help make that happen. When I pointed out that I work hard too and also deserve to have my basic needs met, he said that was different because his career has more potential and my pharmacy tech job is just something I do until I find something better. Except I actually like my job, and I'm good at it. And I wasn't looking for something different until he decided my career wasn't impressive enough to matter. When he showed me this financing calculator where he'd already figured out exactly how much of my paychecks he'd need for the next several months, he had it all planned out like I'd already agreed to this insane arrangement. When I told him absolutely not, he got that look on his face like I'd personally insulted him. That's when he said I was being selfish and unsupportive, and that maybe he needed to reconsider our whole relationship if I wasn't willing to invest in our future together. Our future apparently being defined as him having a cool car while I eat ramen noodles for 6 months. I tried explaining that my student loan payments alone are $400 a month, And if I don't pay my car insurance, I can't legally drive to work, which means I can't earn the money he wants me to give him. But he just kept saying I was making excuses and not thinking creatively about solutions. His creative solution was for me to ask my parents for money or pick up extra shifts or sell some of my stuff. My parents are already helping me with my student loans sometimes when things get tight. They're not wealthy people who can just hand over thousands of dollars so their daughter's boyfriend can buy a fancy car. And I already work full-time plus pick up extra shifts when they're available. What stuff was I supposed to sell? My furniture, my work clothes, my medications? But honestly, after the threats and the public humiliation and his mother getting involved like some kind of backup reinforcement, something shifted in me completely. I'm not the same girl who was trying to be understanding about his car dreams yesterday. The disrespect and manipulation crossed a line I didn't even know I had until someone stomped all over it. Malcolm thinks he's got me cornered with his threats and his little social media campaign designed to embarrass me into compliance. He thinks I'll cave and hand over my money to make the drama stop and go back to being his supportive girlfriend who doesn't ask inconvenient questions about finances. First update. Remember how I said Malcolm had no idea what was about to happen next? Well, turns out I had no idea either because this morning turned into an absolute nightmare that I'm still trying to process. So I'm at the Wegmans doing my weekly grocery shopping around 10 in the morning, trying to stick to my tight budget because someone thinks I should be handing over my paychecks. When I'm loading bags into my car and I hear this voice behind me going, well, if it isn't the selfish girlfriend who won't support her man. I turn around and it's Barbara, Malcolm's mom, standing there with her arms crossed, looking like she's about to deliver some kind of lecture. She's got that fake sweet smile that doesn't reach her eyes, and she's dressed up like she's going to church or something even though it's Wednesday morning. I immediately knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. She starts going off about how she raised Malcolm to expect better from the women in his life, and how disappointed she is that I turned out to be so self-centered. She's standing there in the grocery store parking lot telling me that a real woman would find a way to make her man's dreams come true instead of making excuses about bills and rent. I tried to stay calm and explain that I have financial responsibilities and can't just hand over money I need for basic living expenses. But Barbara wasn't having any of it. She cut me off and said Malcolm told her I was being dramatic about my situation, and that if I really loved him, I'd figure it out. Then she said something that made my blood boil. She said maybe I wasn't the right kind of girl for her son if I couldn't even do this one thing for him. The audacity of this woman to corner me at the grocery store and try to shame me into bankrupting myself for her adult son's car obsession. I told her that Malcolm's financial planning wasn't my responsibility, and that he makes more money than me anyway, so maybe he should save up for his own purchases like a grown adult. That's when she got really nasty. She said I was clearly raised wrong and didn't understand what being in a relationship meant. She actually said my parents obviously didn't teach me proper values about supporting a partner. Bringing my parents into this when she doesn't even know them was crossing a line I didn't know existed. I told her my parents taught me to be independent and not to let people take advantage of me, which seemed like pretty good values to me. Barbara's face got all red, and she said that attitude was exactly the problem with girls my generation. We think we're too good to make sacrifices for love. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. She pulls out her phone and starts scrolling through something. Then she shows me Malcolm's viral post about me being a gold digger. She's standing there reading the comments out loud, the really nasty ones calling me selfish and materialistic. She's literally reading internet strangers insulting me to my face like it's some kind of proof that she's right. I asked her if she thought it was appropriate for her son to publicly humiliate his girlfriend online when he didn't get his way, and she said sometimes men have to take drastic measures to get through to stubborn women. She said Malcolm was just trying to help me see reason, and that I should be grateful he cared enough to try to teach me better. Teach me better. Like I'm some kind of disobedient pet who needs training. I was so angry I could barely speak, but I managed to tell her that threatening to leak private messages was not teaching. It was manipulation and emotional abuse. Barbara laughed and said I was being overly dramatic, and that Malcolm would never actually do anything to hurt me. She said he just needed me to understand how serious he was about this car and how important it was to him. She kept insisting that if I really loved him, I'd want to make him happy, even if it meant some temporary inconvenience for me. Temporary inconvenience. That's what she called me not being able to pay for food and rent for months. Then she said something that made me realize this whole family is completely twisted. She told me that when she was engaged to Malcolm's father, she gave him money for a motorcycle he wanted, even though it meant she had to move back in with her parents for a while. She said that's what women do for the men they love, and she was proud to make that sacrifice. I pointed out that she was talking about her fiancé, not some boyfriend she'd been dating for 2 years, and that moving in with family wasn't the same as being unable to afford basic necessities. But she just kept going on about how modern women don't understand commitment and loyalty. The conversation got even weirder when she started talking about how Malcolm deserves to feel proud and confident, and how having nice things is important for a man's self-esteem. She said I should want to contribute to his success and happiness instead of holding him back with my selfishness. Like his self-esteem was somehow my financial responsibility. I asked her point blank if she thought it was reasonable for Malcolm to expect his girlfriend to give him her entire paycheck when he makes more money than her and could save up for the car himself. She said that wasn't the point. The point was that couples should support each other's dreams, and I was failing as a partner. But then she said something that really showed me how messed up this whole situation is. She told me that Malcolm had been talking to her about our relationship for months, complaining that I wasn't ambitious enough and didn't seem invested in building a future together. She said he'd been questioning whether I was really girlfriend material or just someone he was wasting time with. So apparently Malcolm had been bad-mouthing me to his mother for months before this car situation even came up. He'd been building a case against me as some kind of inadequate girlfriend who wasn't measuring up to his standards. The car demand wasn't really about the car. It was some kind of test to see if I'd prove my devotion by destroying my financial stability for his wants. I told Barbara that I didn't appreciate being discussed and judged behind my back, and that if Malcolm had concerns about our relationship, he should have talked to me directly, instead of running to mommy about his problems. That really set her off, and she said I was being disrespectful and proving exactly what kind of person I was. She started raising her voice and attracting attention from other people in the parking lot, telling me that I was going to lose Malcolm if I didn't change my attitude and start acting like a supportive girlfriend. She said he had options and didn't have to settle for someone who wasn't willing to invest in their relationship. I told Barbara that any man who would threaten and publicly humiliate his girlfriend for not funding his luxury purchases wasn't worth keeping, and that maybe Malcolm should find someone who shares his values about relationships being financial transactions. She got even more angry and said I was being bitter and vindictive and that I'd regret throwing away a good relationship over money. But here's the thing that really got to me. She kept calling it a good relationship. Like public humiliation and threats and financial manipulation were signs of a healthy partnership. Like Malcolm's behavior was normal and my refusal to accept it was the problem. The whole conversation lasted maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. By the end, Barbara was practically yelling at me in the parking lot about how I was making a huge mistake and how Malcolm deserved better than someone who wouldn't even try to make his dreams come true. She said I was going to end up alone and miserable if I kept thinking I was too good to compromise for love. I finally told her I was done with the conversation and started to get in my car. But she grabbed my arm and said Malcolm was going to call me later and I better think carefully about what I wanted to say to him. She said this was my last chance to fix things before he decided I wasn't worth the trouble. The implied threat was crystal clear. Comply or lose him. Except at this point, losing him was starting to sound like the better option. After she finally left, I just sat in my car for like 10 minutes trying to process what had just happened. The fact that Malcolm had sent his mother to ambush me at the grocery store was so beyond normal relationship problems that I couldn't even wrap my head around it. What man sends his mom to harass his girlfriend into giving him money? But I also realized something else during that horrible conversation. Malcolm and Barbara kept talking about what I should do for him, what I owed him, what kind of girlfriend I should be. Nobody ever mentioned what he should do for me or how he should treat someone he supposedly loves. It was all about my obligations and his needs, and my failings as a partner. They've got the whole thing twisted around where I'm the problem for having boundaries, and Malcolm is the victim for not getting everything he wants immediately, where my financial survival is less important than his emotional satisfaction, where his dreams matter more than my reality. Second update. So I got home from Wegmans around noon, and I'm putting away groceries and trying to calm down from the parking lot confrontation when my phone starts ringing. It's Malcolm, which I was expecting since his mom had basically threatened me that he'd be calling. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but I knew he'd just keep calling, and I was honestly curious to see how he was going to try to spin his mother harassing me in public. Plus, if I'm being completely honest, after that parking lot ambush, I was kind of in the mood to watch him dig himself into an even deeper hole. Sometimes when people are being this ridiculous, you just have to let them keep talking so you can fully appreciate the absurdity. He starts off all fake casual, asking how my day is going. Like he doesn't know his mom just spent 20 minutes yelling at me about what a terrible girlfriend I am. So I cut right to the point and asked him if he sent Barbara to ambush me at the grocery store or if she came up with that brilliant plan all by herself. Malcolm got immediately defensive and said his mother was just concerned about our relationship and wanted to help me understand his perspective better. He said Barbara thought maybe hearing from another woman about how relationships work might get through to me in a way that he couldn't manage on his own. The condescending tone in his voice when he said how relationships work made me want to throw my phone across the room. I told him that sending his mommy to corner me in a parking lot and lecture me about my values wasn't helping our relationship. It was showing me exactly what kind of man he really is. That's when he started getting annoyed and said I was twisting everything around and making his family out to be villains when they were just trying to help save our relationship. Then he launched into this whole speech about how disappointed he was in my reaction to what he called a simple request for support. He said he'd been thinking about our conversation and he realized the problem was that I didn't understand how important this car was to him and his future success. He actually used the words, future success, like buying an expensive car, was going to transform his career somehow. I asked him to explain exactly how a Dodge Challenger was going to improve his job performance, and he got mad and said I was being deliberately obtuse and missing the bigger picture. He started going on about image and confidence and how successful people invest in things that project success. He said I was thinking small and holding both of us back with my limited mindset. The manipulation was so pathetic and obvious that I almost laughed out loud. Here was this grown man seriously trying to convince me that demanding my rent money was somehow reasonable, using the same tired tactics that probably worked on insecure women before me. But I could see right through his bullshit. Every guilt trip, every attempt to make me feel selfish for having basic financial needs, every pathetic argument about success and investment. What kind of loser tries to gaslight his girlfriend into funding his midlife crisis car? I was watching him fumble through these manipulative talking points, and all I could think was how embarrassing it must be to be this desperate and transparent. Normal boyfriends don't hold private conversations hostage to extort money from their partners, and the fact that Malcolm thought this was acceptable behavior just showed me exactly what kind of man I'd been wasting my time with. But then he said something that really showed me how twisted his thinking had become. He told me that he'd been talking to his friends about our situation, and they all agreed that I was being unreasonable and selfish. He said Graham specifically told him that when he bought his Camaro, his girlfriend Emily didn't hesitate to help with the down payment because she understood that his success was their success. I pointed out that Graham and Emily have been together for 5 years and are engaged, not 2-year dating partners, and that they probably discussed major financial decisions together instead of one person demanding the other's entire paycheck. But Malcolm just said that was exactly his point. Real couples who are serious about their future make these kinds of investments together. He told me that getting this car wasn't just about wanting something nice. It was about proving that we were ready to take our relationship to the next level. He said couples who can't make financial sacrifices for each other aren't ready for marriage and maybe shouldn't be wasting each other's time. So apparently in Malcolm's twisted mind, bankrupting myself for his car was some kind of relationship test to prove I was marriage material. He had turned his selfish want into a measurement of my commitment and love for him. I asked him point blank if he was seriously suggesting that my willingness to give him my rent money was a prerequisite for any future together, and he said that successful relationships require sacrifice and compromise from both partners. When I pointed out that all the sacrifice seemed to be coming from me while he kept all his money for himself, he got really angry. Malcolm started yelling that I was being dramatic and turning everything into some kind of gender war instead of recognizing that he was trying to build something better for both of us. He said the car would benefit me too because I'd get to ride in it and be seen with someone who had his life together. Like I should be grateful for the privilege of being associated with his fancy car that I paid for. This fool really thought I should be thankful for the opportunity to bankrupt myself so he could look cool in front of his friends. Like being seen in a car I couldn't afford was some kind of amazing gift he was offering me. I told him that if he wanted to impress people with expensive things, he should use his own money like every other adult on the planet. Then he said something that made me realize just how little respect he actually has for me. He told me that my job at the pharmacy wasn't a real career anyway. Just something I was doing temporarily until I figured out what I actually wanted to do with my life. He said since I wasn't investing in my own future, the least I could do was invest in his. I couldn't believe he was dismissing my career like that. I've been working in pharmacy for 3 years. I'm good at what I do. I help people get the medications they need. And I actually enjoy most aspects of my job. But apparently none of that matters because it doesn't make enough money to impress Malcolm's friends or fund his lifestyle upgrades. When I told him that my career was important to me, and that I wasn't just killing time until something better came along, he laughed and said I was being defensive about a job that anyone could do with minimal training. He said if I was serious about having a real career, I'd be working on improving myself instead of making excuses about bills and rent. The disrespect was so complete and devastating that I actually felt sorry for him. Imagine being so insecure about your own job that you have to put down your girlfriend's honest work to feel better about yourself. I told him that at least my job actually helps people instead of just pushing paperwork around an insurance office, and he completely lost it. Malcolm started screaming that I was being cruel and attacking him personally when he was just trying to have an honest conversation about our future. He said I was showing my true colors and proving that I didn't really care about his feelings or his goals. Like, buddy, you just spent 10 minutes trashing my career and now you want to talk about hurt feelings? But it got even worse. Malcolm started talking about how he'd been reconsidering our whole relationship lately and wondering if I was really the kind of partner he needed for the life he wanted to build. He said successful men need supportive women who understand that sometimes you have to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. I asked him what gains I was supposed to be getting from bankrupting myself for his car, and he said I'd gain a boyfriend who felt confident and successful and could therefore be a better partner to me. So my reward for destroying my financial stability was supposed to be a slightly happier Malcolm. The logic was so insane and narcissistic that I started laughing. I told him that if his confidence depended on me giving him my rent money, then maybe he should work on his self-esteem issues instead of trying to make them my financial responsibility. That really set him off and he started yelling about how I was being mean and unsupportive and turning everything into a personal attack. Then he brought up the social media situation and said he'd been getting a lot of support from people who understood his frustration with my attitude. He said maybe I should read some of the comments on his post to get a better perspective on how other people viewed our situation. He actually suggested that internet strangers calling me names might help me see the error of my ways. I literally started cracking up at this point. I told him that taking relationship advice from random people on social media was about as smart as asking ChatGPT to plan his budget, or getting life coaching from a magic 8-ball. Like seriously, what's next, Malcolm? Are you going to check your horoscope to see if Mercury is in retrograde before making any major decisions about our future? The fact that he thought random internet comments were somehow valid relationship advice showed me just how disconnected from reality he really was. I told him that anyone who thought demanding your girlfriend's entire paycheck was reasonable probably wasn't someone whose opinion I valued very highly, and that maybe he should stick to getting his validation from people who actually know what a healthy relationship looks like. He got even more defensive and said I was making fun of him instead of taking his concerns seriously, which just made me laugh harder. I mean, when someone suggests that Facebook trolls should be your relationship counselors, what other response is there? That's when Malcolm brought up the nuclear option. He reminded me about our private text conversations and said he really hoped he wouldn't have to share those with anyone, but that he needed to know I was taking this situation seriously. He said he had screenshots of messages that might not look great taken out of context. The threat was crystal clear, even though he tried to dress it up as concern. Give him the money or he'd release private conversations that he could manipulate to make me look bad. He was holding our relationship intimacy hostage to get what he wanted. I told him that threatening to violate my privacy was not the action of someone who loved me, and he got defensive and said he wasn't threatening anything, just pointing out that our private conversations should probably stay private. But the implication was obvious: cooperate or face the consequences. But honestly, at this point, I was just impressed by how many different ways he could find to be a terrible person in one conversation. Public humiliation, financial manipulation, emotional blackmail, career dismissal, and now threats to violate my privacy. It was like he was going down a checklist of abusive behaviors to see which one would finally break me. But then he said something that made me realize this was about way more than just the car. He told me that he'd been thinking about our future together, and he needed to know that I was the kind of woman who would support his ambitions and help him achieve his goals. He said if I couldn't do this one thing for him, how could he trust me to be there for the bigger challenges that successful couples face? So in Malcolm's mind, this wasn't about a car at all. This was about establishing the power dynamic in our relationship. He wanted to prove that he could make unreasonable demands and I'd comply. He wanted to train me to prioritize his wants over my basic needs. He wanted to see if he could manipulate me into financial dependence and submission. The conversation went on for almost an hour with him trying different angles to convince me. But every single approach came back to the same basic demand: give him my money and accept that his wants were more important than my needs. He never once acknowledged that what he was asking for was unreasonable or that I had legitimate concerns about my own financial survival. By the end of the call, I was exhausted from trying to explain basic concepts like personal boundaries and financial responsibility to someone who seemed fundamentally incapable of understanding that other people's needs mattered too. Malcolm ended the conversation by saying he'd give me until Friday to think about everything and make the right decision. The right decision. Like there was only one acceptable outcome and anything else would be wrong and selfish and proof that I didn't really love him. He never apologized for the public humiliation or the threats or the complete dismissal of my career. He was so focused on getting what he wanted that he couldn't even pretend to care about how his behavior was affecting me. Last update, I am living for what happened on Friday, and I need to share every single detail because what went down was so much better than anything I could have planned. So Friday morning rolls around. Malcolm's big deadline day where I was supposed to cave and hand over my paycheck like a good little girlfriend. Instead, I decided it was time to take some real action instead of just talking in circles with this manipulative loser. I called my dad Thursday night and told him the whole situation, about Malcolm demanding my paycheck, the threats, his psycho mother ambushing me, everything. My dad was furious and kept asking me to repeat certain parts like he couldn't believe someone would actually behave that way toward their own girlfriend. Friday morning, my dad calls me around 11 asking if I'm at work. I told him I'd called in sick because I was honestly too angry and stressed to deal with customers' problems all day. He said good because he had some business to handle and wanted me to come with him as a witness. But here's where it gets absolutely perfect. My dad's coworker Kenneth had seen Malcolm's viral post on Facebook and called my dad that morning laughing about this pathetic guy demanding his girlfriend's paycheck for a car. Kenneth was reading the comments out loud, all the people calling me a gold digger and selfish, not realizing he was talking about his coworker's daughter. When my dad told Kenneth exactly who that post was about, Kenneth went completely silent. Then my dad said he needed to go have a conversation with this boy about how men are supposed to treat women, and Kenneth offered to come along as backup. My dad picked me up and we drove straight to Malcolm's office. I tried to tell him maybe this wasn't the best idea, but my dad said no man was going to publicly humiliate his daughter and threaten her and get away with it. He said Malcolm was about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong family. My dad marched right into that office like he owned the place. The receptionist tried to stop him, but he just said loudly that he needed to speak with Malcolm about the lies he'd been spreading about his daughter online. Half the office heard him and people started gathering around to watch. Malcolm came out to the lobby looking confused until he saw me standing behind my dad, and then his face went completely white. My dad didn't waste any time with small talk. He asked Malcolm if he was the one who posted about demanding his girlfriend's entire paycheck, and then called her a gold digger when she said no. Malcolm started stuttering that it was a misunderstanding and that social media posts don't tell the whole story, but my dad cut him off. He said there was no misunderstanding about a grown man demanding his girlfriend's rent money for a toy car, and then crying online when she had the backbone to say no. The entire office was watching at this point, and Malcolm looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. My dad kept his voice level, but everyone could hear every word as he asked Malcolm what kind of man threatens a woman with revenge for not bankrupting herself for his wants. Malcolm tried to say that private relationship issues shouldn't be discussed at his workplace, and my dad said maybe Malcolm should have thought about that before he made their private relationship issues public on social media so strangers could call his daughter names. Then my dad really started laying into him. He said he'd raised 3 daughters and never once had to teach them that real men don't beg for money from women, don't send their mommies to fight their battles, and don't throw tantrums when they don't get their way. He asked Malcolm if his own father knew what kind of man he'd raised, because any decent father would be ashamed to have a son who behaves like such a pathetic excuse for a man. Malcolm was turning red and trying to stutter out some kind of response, but my dad wasn't finished. He said it was embarrassing watching a man act like a spoiled child who throws fits when he can't have expensive toys, and that maybe Malcolm should have spent less time planning how to manipulate women and more time learning how to be an actual adult. My dad asked Malcolm's coworkers if they'd ever seen anything like this before. A grown man who expects his girlfriend to pay his bills while he spends her rent money on cars. He said where he comes from, men protect and provide for their families, they don't leech off women and then abuse them when the money runs out. The humiliation on Malcolm's face was beautiful. His co-workers were all staring and whispering, and you could see him realizing that his reputation was being destroyed in real time. One of the older women in the office actually said out loud that she'd never heard of anything so ridiculous in her life. Then my dad dropped the ultimatum that made Malcolm's day even worse. He told Malcolm he had until midnight to get every single thing that belonged to him out of my apartment, and that anything left behind would be in a dumpster by Saturday morning. He said Malcolm had lost the privilege of living with a woman who was too good for him the moment he decided to publicly humiliate her for not funding his midlife crisis. Malcolm started panicking and saying he needed more time, that he couldn't find a new place that quickly. But my dad said that wasn't his problem or mine. He said Malcolm should have thought about housing before he decided to bite the hand that was feeding him. Maybe his mommy could take him in since she seemed so invested in his relationship decisions. My dad said Malcolm was lucky he was getting until midnight instead of being thrown out on the street right that minute, which is what would have happened if my dad had raised such a disrespectful son. He told Malcolm that real men don't threaten women, don't manipulate them for money, and don't send their mothers to harass their girlfriends in parking lots like some kind of pathetic mama's boy. Then my dad did something I'll never forget. He pulled out his phone and said that since Malcolm seemed to think public humiliation was an appropriate way to handle relationship problems, maybe Malcolm would like to make a public apology to set the record straight about what kind of man he really is. Malcolm started begging my dad not to record anything, saying his job was already in jeopardy, and he couldn't handle any more public embarrassment. My dad said Malcolm should have considered the consequences before he decided to act like a manipulative little boy who throws fits when women won't give him money. But my dad was already recording, and he told Malcolm he could either explain to everyone watching why he thought financial abuse was acceptable, or he could apologize for being a lying, manipulative coward who picks on women because he's too weak to handle actual adult responsibilities. The whole office was completely silent watching this unfold. Malcolm looked around at all his co-workers staring at him, and he just completely broke down. He started crying and saying he was sorry and that he'd made terrible mistakes and that he knew he didn't deserve someone like me. My dad kept the phone recording and told Malcolm to be specific about what he was apologizing for, and why he thought it was acceptable to treat women like ATMs with benefits. So there's Malcolm, sobbing in front of his entire office, admitting on camera that he'd tried to financially manipulate his girlfriend and threaten her into funding his expensive car through public humiliation and blackmail. It was the most pathetic thing I've ever seen in my life. This grown man who'd spent a week acting like he had all the power, completely falling apart the moment someone stood up to him. His co-workers were looking at him like he was insane, and honestly, who could blame them?